Welcome back to the channel, and thank you for joining me today on what I believe will be one of the most transformative videos you watch this year. My name is Rabbi David, and I am thrilled to share with you an incredible journey that took me from absolute financial zero to building a seven-figure net worth using only three fundamental Jewish money principles that have been embedded in our tradition for thousands of years. This is not a story about luck, inheritance, or taking dangerous financial risks. Instead, this is a testimony to the power of ancient wisdom applied to modern financial circumstances. If you have ever wondered whether Torah-based principles could actually work in today's economy, then this video is specifically designed for you. By the end of our time together, you will understand not just what these three laws are, but exactly how to implement them into your own financial life starting today. Before we begin, I want to invite you to join the Torah Millionaire Business School. It is a complete 14-module program where we dive deep into the Torah's perspective on money, work, and stewardship. You can find the link in the comments and in the description below. Let me take you back to the beginning of my story, because understanding where I started is crucial to understanding how profound these principles truly are. 20 years ago, I was not a wealthy rabbi living in a comfortable community with a substantial salary. I was actually a young man struggling with significant debt, working multiple jobs just to cover my basic expenses, and feeling completely overwhelmed by the financial burden I had accumulated. I had made poor decisions in my 20s, spending money on things that did not align with my values, and suddenly finding myself at age 30 with almost nothing to show for the previous decade of work. My apartment was small. My car was unreliable, and my bank account would fluctuate between barely positive and deeply negative, depending on which bills came due that month. I remember sitting in my tiny kitchen one evening, looking at my mounting credit card statements and genuinely wondering if I would ever be able to break free from this cycle of financial stress. That moment of desperation, however, became the catalyst for my transformation. I realized that something fundamental had to change, and it was not just about earning more money or working harder. It was about completely restructuring my relationship with money itself. It was during this period of reflection that I began studying the financial teachings embedded throughout our Jewish texts with a new level of intention. I was not looking for shortcuts or quick fixes. Instead, I was searching for timeless principles that had guided Jewish communities through prosperity and adversity for millennia. What I discovered was that our sages had already mapped out the entire territory of wealth building, stewardship, and financial ethics. Three particular principles stood out to me as foundational, and these became the pillars upon which I would rebuild my entire financial life. I committed to understanding these laws not just intellectually, but practically, and to implementing them with absolute consistency. What followed was a 15-year journey of disciplined execution that would ultimately lead to the seven-figure net worth I enjoy today. More importantly, it led to a sense of peace around money that I never thought was possible for someone like me. The first and most powerful principle I embraced was the law of Maser, which translates to tithing, or 1/10. This ancient law teaches that we should dedicate a specific portion of our income to charitable purposes and sacred goals. Now, when I first encountered this principle while deeply in debt, my immediate reaction was skepticism. How could I possibly give away money when I was struggling just to pay my basic expenses? This resistance is something I hear frequently from people who are new to Torah-based financial thinking, However, what I would eventually discover through my study of the texts and through my own experimentation was that Maser is not really about the money at all. It is about the intention, the consciousness, and the alignment of your financial actions with higher purposes. The Rambam teaches that tithing is actually a mechanism for training our character and removing the grip of materialism on our minds and hearts. When I finally began to allocate 10% of my income to Maser, starting very small since my income was minimal at that time, something fundamental shifted in my consciousness. Suddenly, I was not working just for myself and my own survival. I was working as part of a larger system that included supporting community, education, and helping those in need. What happened next was counterintuitive. By reducing the amount of money I was spending on myself through the intentional practice of Maser, I became far more conscious about how I was spending the remaining 90%. When you make a conscious decision to give away 10% to causes that matter to you, you simultaneously make a statement to yourself that you are not desperate for every dollar that passes through your hands. This shifts your mentality from scarcity to purpose-driven stewardship. I began evaluating every purchase through a new filter. Was this expense aligned with my values? Was this serving my spiritual growth, my family, my health, or my future? Or was this simply a habitual purchase designed to fill an emotional void or maintain a certain self-image? By implementing Maser consistently, I cut my lifestyle expenses by approximately 30% within the first year. I was not making significantly more money than before, but I was keeping significantly more because my purchasing decisions had become intentional rather than reactive. The 10% I was giving away had actually freed the other 90%. This is the paradoxical beauty of the Maser principle. You must give in order to properly receive and maintain. The second principle that transformed my financial trajectory was the concept of heter iska, which is a fascinating Jewish legal mechanism that addresses the Torah's prohibition against charging interest on loans within the Jewish community. While heter iska is traditionally a lending tool, I discovered that the underlying principle contained profound wisdom about wealth building and business structure. The essence of heter iska is that it transforms a simple loan transaction into a partnership arrangement where both parties share in the risk and the reward. This is not just a technical workaround for religious law, it is actually a superior model for how economic relationships should function. When I began to apply this principle to my own wealth-building efforts, I started to think about money not as something I earned and kept for myself, but as something I could deploy into ventures, businesses, and investments where my capital could work alongside the efforts and expertise of other people. During my early years out of debt, I realized I had a skill in education and community building, but I did not have significant capital to start my own ventures. So I began looking for partnerships where I could contribute my expertise in exchange for a share of the profits rather than taking a fixed salary. These were heter iska arrangements at their core, even if the business partners did not know I was thinking about them in those terms. My first major partnership was with an established educational organization that wanted to expand their Torah curriculum but lacked someone with my specific skill set in adult education and community engagement. Rather than asking for a large fixed salary that they might not have been able to pay, I proposed a structure where I would receive a base compensation that was modest, plus a percentage of revenue generated from the new programs I would develop and manage. This was risky because my income was no longer guaranteed, but it aligned my interests perfectly with the success of the organization. Suddenly, I was not just an employee counting the hours until I could go home. I was a stakeholder with a vested interest in the growth and profitability of the enterprise. This first arrangement generated enough additional income that within 3 years I had built a cushion of savings that allowed me to explore other opportunities. I took the principles I learned from that first Heter Iska partnership and applied them to subsequent ventures. I worked with a publisher to develop and market Jewish financial literacy materials on a revenue-sharing basis. I consulted with several synagogues on implementing financial wellness programs, again, structuring these as partnerships where my compensation increased as the programs grew. Each of these arrangements allowed me to scale my income without requiring a corresponding increase in the amount of time I was working. I was leveraging other people's platforms, audiences, and resources through partnership structures rather than trying to do everything myself. By year 7 of implementing the Heter Iska principle consistently, my annual income had grown to approximately $150,000, which was a massive increase from the $35,000 I was earning in year 1. However, this was not yet at the $1 million mark I knew was possible. What Heter Iska had done was give me the framework to think about wealth creation differently. It had shown me that real wealth comes not from trading hours for dollars, but from creating systems, partnerships, and ventures where multiple streams of income can be generated from a single effort. This principle is why so many successful entrepreneurs and business owners structure their companies as partnerships and equity arrangements rather than simple salary positions. The Torah was teaching me through the Heter Iska law that this is the superior model for wealth creation. The third and final principle that completed my path to $1 million was the law of tzedakah, which is often translated as charity but actually means something closer to justice or righteousness. This is a crucial distinction because it means that giving to those in need is not optional benevolence. It is a fundamental obligation and expression of justice. However, the Jewish sages developed an entire framework around how and when and to whom tzedakah should be given. The highest form of tzedakah, according to Maimonides, is to enable someone to become self-sufficient so they no longer need charity. This might be through teaching them a trade, helping them start a business, or providing capital for a productive venture. As I was building my own wealth and financial stability, I began applying this highest form of tzedakah by actually mentoring others and helping them implement the same principles that had worked for me. I started a free monthly workshop at my synagogue where I taught these Jewish money laws to anyone interested in learning. I began coaching young professionals one-on-one through the early stages of getting out of debt and building financial discipline. I connected entrepreneurs with resources and partnerships that could help them scale their businesses. What happened through this consistent practice of tzedakah was extraordinary. By helping others apply these principles, I deepened my own understanding exponentially. When you are teaching something, you are forced to articulate it, defend it, troubleshoot it, and refine it in ways that independent study never requires. Beyond the personal learning benefit, I began to build a reputation as someone who genuinely understood wealth creation from a Jewish perspective and who was willing to help others achieve it. This reputation opened doors to consulting opportunities, speaking engagements, and partnerships I would never have accessed otherwise. Several of my mentees went on to build successful businesses, and as they grew, they brought me in as an advisor or partner. One particular mentee who I coached through the process of starting a financial services firm for Jewish business owners eventually brought me in as a partner in that venture. This partnership alone generated enough income over 5 years to push my net worth past the $1 million threshold. But perhaps more importantly than the direct income, implementing tzedakah at this highest level created a virtuous cycle in my financial life. When you are genuinely committed to helping others become financially independent and successful, you stop viewing money and economic success as a zero-sum game where someone else's gain is your loss. Instead, you begin to see economic growth as something that can benefit everyone involved. This mindset shift is incredibly powerful because it removes the fear and scarcity mentality that keeps so many people financially trapped. When I was helping others succeed, I simultaneously became more resourceful, more generous, more connected, and more aligned with principles that actually work for creating real wealth. Tzedakah transformed my relationship with money from seeing it as something I needed to hoard and protect into seeing it as something I could confidently circulate because I trusted in the principles that generate it. Now, I want to be very clear about something important. These three principles, Maser, Heter Iska, and Tzedakah, are not a magic formula that works overnight or without effort. When I first began implementing them, I was still working hard, still facing obstacles, still making mistakes, and learning from them. What these principles did was provide a framework and a mentality within which my hard work could be maximized. They removed the behaviors and mindsets that were sabotaging my financial progress. They redirected my efforts toward activities and partnerships that actually built wealth rather than just generated income. They connected me to a community and a tradition of financial wisdom that supported my success at every step. Let me walk you through a typical year from my journey to show you how these three principles worked together in practical application. In year 4 of my financial transformation, after I had been practicing these principles consistently, my income was approximately $65,000 annually. I immediately allocated $6,500 to Maser. This was distributed across 4 different causes. A scholarship fund for students in my community who could not otherwise afford Jewish education, a free financial counseling program for families in crisis, a local food bank in my neighborhood, and a business mentorship program for young entrepreneurs. By committing to this specific allocation, I no longer had to make a decision every time I encountered a worthy cause. The decision had already been made. I was giving 10%, and that money was going to categories that aligned with my deepest values. With the remaining $58,500, I was very intentional. I lived on approximately $35,000 annually, which covered my rent, food, transportation, insurance, and modest entertainment. This left me with $23,500 that I could allocate to building wealth. I took $10,000 and used it to formalize my consulting practice. I created a proper business structure, invested in some basic marketing and web presence, and began taking on consulting clients outside of my organizational partnerships. I took another $5,000 and invested it in financial assets, primarily index funds and some real estate investment trusts. The remaining $8,500 I held as an emergency reserve. This multiple stream approach, supported by the Heter Iska principle of partnership and shared risk, meant that my income was never dependent on a single source. If one partnership declined, I had other streams. If my consulting practice slowed, my investments could generate income. If there was an unexpected expense, I had the reserve rather than having to go back into debt. By year 8 of this implementation, following these same principles consistently with growing income due to successful partnerships and scaling my consulting business, my annual income had reached $230,000. I maintained my Maser allocation, now giving away $23,000 annually. I was living on approximately $70,000 because my lifestyle had naturally expanded somewhat as my income grew, but not proportionally. I was investing approximately $137,000 annually into a combination of business development, investment assets, and strategic partnerships. By this point, my various business partnerships, investments, and consulting fees were generating enough passive and semi-passive income that I could have stopped working and maintained my current lifestyle, but I did not. Instead, I increased my tzedakah work significantly, taking on more mentees and helping more entrepreneurs. This consistent practice of reinvesting back into the community through tzedakah actually led to my largest partnership opportunity, which ultimately pushed my net worth over $1 million. Let me be transparent about the fact that the specific journey to $1 million involved some luck and timing that I could not have controlled. A particular investment in a startup that I made early in my entrepreneurial journey wound up being acquired at a valuation that generated substantial capital gains for early investors. A business partner introduced me to an opportunity in real estate that appreciated significantly more than I had projected. But here is what I want to emphasize. The luck was only possible because I had positioned myself to recognize opportunities when they arrived. Through the consistent practice of Maser, I had developed enough financial consciousness and clarity of values that I could immediately recognize when an opportunity aligned with my principles. Through Heder Iska, I had developed enough partnership skills and business acumen that I could negotiate favorable terms when those opportunities presented themselves. Through tzedakah, I had developed enough of a network and enough of a reputation that people actively brought opportunities to me rather than me having to search for them. The principles created the conditions for luck to find me. Let me share some practical advice for how you can implement these 3 principles starting today, regardless of your current financial situation. If you are currently in debt, start with Maser at a smaller percentage than 10%. Begin with 2% or 3%. The principle is not the specific number, but the practice of intentional giving and the consciousness shift it creates. Many sages teach that when you are in debt, you can defer Maser, but I actually suggest a modified version. Give something, even if it is small, because it trains your character and reminds you that your recovery is connected to something larger than just your own financial struggle. Find a cause or two that you deeply believe in and direct your Maser giving there. Make it automatic through a standing transfer on a specific date each month. Do not make it a decision you revisit constantly. Commit to it and execute it. For Heder Iska, begin to evaluate the skills, knowledge, or networks you possess that could be more valuable in partnership form than in employment form. If you have specialized expertise in your field, explore whether you could structure some work as project-based or commission-based, rather than hourly or salary-based. If you have capital but lack expertise in a particular area, look for partnerships where your capital combines with someone else's expertise. Even if you cannot formally structure these as legal Heder Iska agreements, the principle of aligning incentives through partnership is what matters most. It changes the dynamic from employee-employer to mutual value creation. For tzedakah, start by identifying one specific way you could help someone else move toward financial independence or success. This does not require you to be wealthy. You could mentor someone in your field. You could introduce 2 people who should know each other professionally. You could teach a free workshop on a topic where you have expertise. You could help someone debug their business model or financial plan. The highest form of these 3 laws, Maser, Heder Iska, and tzedakah, are not just religious obligations, they are a complete operating system for building wealth that is sustainable, ethical, and deeply fulfilling. When I applied them consistently, my financial life transformed, not because I found a shortcut, but because I aligned my actions with principles that have been tested across thousands of years of human experience. If you are ready to go deeper into these principles and apply them to your own financial journey, I invite you to join the Torah Millionaire Business School. We cover all of this in detail with practical exercises, community support, and a step-by-step framework for building real wealth of the Torah. The link is in the comments and in the description below. Thank you for watching. May your wealth grow in proportion to the good you do with it. Shalom.